Screams in the house mingled with the sound of a knife hitting bone. A woman, obsessed with control, tried to turn her own twin children into victims. But her bloody plan backfired. The teenagers realized their mother was ready to kill them and decided to take a desperate step, outsmarting her. At first glance, the family seemed ordinary. The mother, a woman in her 40s, was raising twin sons who had just turned 14 after a divorce. The father had long since left home, and contact with him was rare. Occasional phone calls, formal meetings where conversations focused primarily on school and everyday matters. The children spent most of their lives in the confined space of their mother, who kept them under constant supervision. Neighbors knew her as strict and withdrawn. She rarely interacted with other parents, didn't allow her children to visit, and practically didn't allow them to invite friends home. Outwardly, this could be explained by concern, but in reality, her behavior increasingly resembled a manic need to isolate her sons from the outside world. At school, teachers noticed that the boys were withdrawn, avoided conversations about family, and responded to questions about their mother with monosyllables. Alarming signs gradually began to emerge. The woman became irritated at any provocation, would scream, and would punish the children for even minor infractions. Physical pressure was combined with psychological. Constant accusations, reproaches, and insults destroyed the atmosphere in the home. At the same time, she often used her personal closeness with her sons as a tool of control, creating situations in which the teenagers felt vulnerable. These episodes were brief, but explicit enough for the children to understand the abnormality of what was happening. Those around him noticed only isolated outbursts. Sometimes the boys would show up for class tired or depressed, and some teachers would raise questions, but no serious reports were made to the police or social services. Meanwhile, relatives on his father's side noticed unusual behavior. His mother limited contact, refusing to allow visits, blaming on the children's busy schedule. With each passing month, the tension in the house grew. Their mother's control intensified. She checked their phones, imposed strict rules, and punished them for the slightest infraction. The atmosphere became so oppressive that the twins felt like prisoners. They began looking for ways to resist, discussing their mother's behavior among themselves, but taking an open step was terrifying. It was during this period that the first signs of the woman's dangerous intentions emerged. She stopped hiding her outbursts of rage, saying that the children were interfering with her life and that they were worthless. Her words were threatening, and the boys began to seriously fear for their own safety. They understood that their mother was capable of crossing the line, but they still didn't fully believe that it would culminate in actual crime. Outwardly, the family remained invisible to society. The small house on the outskirts appeared ordinary. The utility bills were paid, and the children attended school regularly. But behind closed doors, a dangerous world was emerging, where the mother was gradually losing control, and the twins, the only witnesses to what was happening, were searching for a way to survive the growing threat. Over time, their mother's behavior became increasingly sinister. Whereas her outbursts of aggression could previously be attributed to fatigue or post-divorce stress, they now escalated into systematic violence. The twins noted that their mother didn't simply yell or threaten, but spoke of death, of how life would be easier without them, and of how she didn't need them anyway. Such statements were repeated repeatedly and ceased to be perceived as emotional breakdowns. The first disturbing episode occurred one night when the woman locked the doors and windows and hid the keys. She walked around the house, checking each room, as if preparing for something. The children noticed her take a knife from a drawer in the kitchen, but then put it back. No action followed that night, but the impression remained strong. The twins realized their mother was indeed up to something. The boys tried to share their concerns with their relatives. During a call to their father, one of them mentioned that things were getting dangerous at home and that their mother was acting strangely. But their father decided the teenagers were exaggerating and limited himself to promising to talk when the opportunity arises. The twins didn't tell their maternal grandmother, fearing to escalate their mother's anger. Thus, their concerns remained within the family, without adult support. The situation was complicated by the mother's careful concealment of any signs of her instability from outsiders. In the presence of neighbors or teachers, she remained polite and reserved. When a social worker from a school visited to clarify attendance issues, the mother demonstrated that the house was in order and assured everyone that the children were well cared for. No official had any reason to suspect her. For the twins, days became a constant state of anticipation. They began to notice their mother buying alcohol more and more often, and after drinking, her aggression intensified. At such moments, she would spend hours telling the children that they were interfering with her life, that they were just like their father, a traitor and a coward. These monologues would include phrases about how everything could be ended with a single wave of the hand. The teenagers understood that she was referring to the knives she always kept in the kitchen. Gradually, their mother stopped allowing the children to leave the house unaccompanied. She even tried to control their journey to school. She walked them to the door and met them after school. The twins had virtually no privacy left. Their phones were constantly monitored, their messages were deleted, and attempts to call someone secretly resulted in punishment. Several times, the teenagers tried to turn to their classmates for advice. One of their friends heard them say it's dangerous at home, but didn't take it seriously. In a school setting, such words often sounded like exaggerations, and teachers received no information. Thus, the twins were left alone to face a threat that was becoming increasingly real. The tension culminated one evening when the mother suddenly spoke of how the family could end it all together. She sat at the table with a glass of wine and addressed her sons. There was no emotion or hysteria in her voice, only cold determination. The sons exchanged glances and, for the first time, openly realized that their lives were truly in danger. After this conversation, the boys began to formulate their own plan. They understood that the police or school wouldn't intervene unless something obvious happened. Their only chance of survival was to be prepared for decisive action themselves. From that moment on, they began to watch their mother's every move, noting where she kept her knives, where she hid her keys, how often she left her room. The atmosphere in the house grew increasingly dangerous. Any little thing could provoke their mother's anger, and the children no longer doubted that her threats would escalate into action. They didn't know exactly when this would happen, but they were certain the moment was near. The night that proved pivotal began, as usual. The mother prepared dinner, but barely spoke to the children. She seemed preoccupied, her movements tense, her gaze cold. The twins had long since learned to recognize such states. They knew it was best not to contradict her at these times. However, this time they felt particularly wary. The house was silent, broken only by her footsteps in the kitchen. After eating, the woman locked the front door with an extra lock, something she rarely did. She put the keys in her pocket and never let them out of her hand. The children exchanged glances, a signal that their mother was planning something serious. Closer to midnight, she ordered them to their rooms, but she herself remained awake. Her sons were awake. They whispered through the thin wall, discussing what to do if she decided to act. Around 2 in the morning, the twins' mother entered the room where they were sleeping. She was holding a kitchen knife, and that was enough for them to realize they were in danger. The woman stood in the doorway, watching them. She was silent for a few minutes, then said, "You don't deserve this life anyway." Those words sounded like a final decision. One of the twins pretended to remain asleep, while the other quietly reached for the phone they'd hidden under the mattress. But their mother noticed the movement and abruptly stepped toward the bed. She didn't have time to snatch the phone, but she uttered several phrases that clearly conveyed her intent to kill both of them. This was the crucial moment. The children realized they couldn't wait any longer. A struggle ensued. One of the sons jumped up and tried to hold back his mother's knife-wielding hand. The other rushed to the door, but it was locked. They worked in unison. The one holding their mother shouted to his brother to find the keys. The woman resisted, striking, but the teenagers managed to partially immobilize her by grabbing her. A commotion erupted in the house, and furniture could be heard falling. The key couldn't be found immediately. The mother's pockets were buttoned deeply, and they couldn't be opened without effort. Then one of the twins resorted to a trick. He began screaming loudly for help, hoping a neighbor would hear. The mother, frightened by a possible witness, lost her concentration for a second. The children took advantage of this moment. One managed to snatch the keys, the other knocked the knife to the floor. Despite this, the danger remained. The woman lunged for the knife, but her sons were faster. One grabbed the weapon and threw it at the window, breaking the glass. The noise grew even louder and was now certain to attract attention from outside. The mother screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the children's cries. The twins managed to open the door and escape the room. They ran for the exit, but the locks on the front door were complicated. Their mother was gaining on them, and the struggle resumed in the hallway. The teenagers knew they had to stall for time until help arrived. One of them ran to the kitchen window and, without thinking, climbed through the broken glass, sustaining cuts. The other followed. Outside, they screamed at the top of their lungs, alerting the neighbors. The first to react was a man from a neighboring house. He ran into the yard, saw bloody footprints, and called the police. Meanwhile, the children hid behind the garage, afraid their mother would run out after them. However, she remained in the house, which was later attributed to her confusion and shock at the failure of her plan. The police arrived a few minutes later. For the twins, it felt like an eternity. When the patrol approached the house, they explained what had happened. The officers went inside and found the woman in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a broken wine bottle lying nearby. The knife was later found outside. That night proved that the threat was real and the mother's actions were deliberate. The teenagers, acting in concert and with great determination, were able not only to survive but also to gather direct evidence against her. When the twins found themselves outside, they were in a state of near panic. One of them had cut his hands on the glass, his skin was bleeding, and his clothes were torn. Despite this, they ran from the house, screaming and calling for help. A neighbor, hearing the noise, came out into the yard and saw the boys hysterically pointing at their house. The man immediately called the police and an ambulance. His wife brought the children towels to stop the bleeding and try to calm them down. The teenagers, still gasping with fear, told him their mother had tried to kill them. Their words were halting, but the gist was clear. The threat was coming from inside the house, and action was needed immediately. A few minutes later, the first patrol cars arrived on the scene. Police officers, having received information from neighbors and the children themselves, entered the house. The woman was in the kitchen, her hands shaking, with shards of glass and traces of alcohol lying nearby. She offered no resistance, but her behavior was erratic. She alternately laughed, remained silent, and tried to defend herself. Meanwhile, the twins were placed in an ambulance. Paramedics treated their cuts, checked their general condition, and noted severe emotional distress. Despite the stress, the children gave consistent accounts. They described in detail how their mother entered the house at night with a knife, how she tried to attack them, and what they did to escape. Police found evidence of a struggle inside the house. In the bedroom, furniture was overturned, blood stains from the boys' cuts, shoe prints, and broken glass were on the floor. Outside, a knife had been thrown out the window. These findings corroborated the teenager's account and made the situation clear. It was an attempted murder. After her arrest, the woman was taken to the police station for questioning. The twins were temporarily placed in the custody of social services. In their presence, police officers continued to collect their statements, trying not to overwhelm the children with unnecessary details. Importantly, the brothers told the same story, virtually identical in their descriptions of events. This ruled out the possibility of fabrication or misinterpretation. Neighbors also testified. They confirmed hearing screams and the sound of breaking glass, and then saw children running out of the house. One of the men noted that the boys had previously reported their mother's strange behavior, but hadn't taken it seriously. Now, however, everything became ominously clear. Social workers noted signs of prolonged psychological distress in the twins: isolation, fear of trusting adults, and increased anxiety. It was decided that they would be temporarily placed in a specialized center until the court determined their future placement. The mother, detained that night, behaved erratically during interrogation. She alternately denied any intention to harm and then stated that the children deserved punishment. Investigators recorded her inconsistent responses and referred her for a psychiatric evaluation. For the twins, that night marked a turning point. They would never return to the house where they grew up. Everything that had once seemed familiar had become a crime scene. The house was sealed off, and forensic experts were working inside. The children watched from the sidelines, realizing their lives had changed forever. After her arrest, the woman was taken to the police station. There, she was questioned in the presence of a court-appointed lawyer. Initially, she denied the attempted murder, claiming that the kids made it all up and that the knife had been accidentally dropped into her hands. However, the evidence collected by the police contradicted these claims. At the scene, they found evidence of a struggle, her fingerprints on the knife, and the teenager's torn clothes stained with blood. The key point was the coincidence of both twins' testimonies. They described the events of the night separately and in detail. Their stories matched every detail, from the moment their mother entered the room with a knife to the moment one of them threw the weapon out the window. These similarities ruled out the possibility of a prefabricated version of events. For the investigators, this directly confirmed the veracity of their accounts. The woman was sent for a psychiatric evaluation. Experts determined that she suffered from a personality disorder exacerbated by alcohol abuse. However, the experts' conclusion was unambiguous. She was aware of her actions and was capable of controlling them at the time of the incident. This meant she could not be declared insane and could face criminal liability. The investigation lasted several months. Investigators thoroughly examined the family's circumstances, collecting testimony from neighbors, teachers, and relatives. Neighbors noted that the children had recently appeared depressed and that their mother had frequently displayed aggression. Teachers recalled complaints about the teenagers' fatigue and withdrawal. Relatives on their father's side confirmed that their mother had prevented the children from communicating with her ex-husband's family. All of this evidence painted a picture of prolonged abuse and control. Based on the evidence collected, the prosecutor's office brought charges of attempted murder of 2 individuals, committed with particular cruelty. The charge was serious and carried a long prison sentence. The trial began 6 months later. The twins testified behind closed doors to protect them from unwanted attention. In court, they described the events of that night in detail. Their accounts were accompanied by physical evidence, a knife, photographs of the crime scene, and medical reports of the cuts. The defense attempted to portray the mother as a woman driven to despair by dire circumstances and insisted that her mental state be taken into account. However, the court found that this did not absolve her of responsibility. The prosecutor pointed out that the defendant's actions were deliberate. She had locked the doors in advance, hidden the keys, and taken a knife. The sentence was harsh. The woman was found guilty and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. The court took into account the children's condition, their age, and the circumstances of the crime. The trial was difficult for the twins, but it secured their right to a defense and confirmed that their testimony was decisive. After the verdict, they remained in the custody of social services and awaited placement with their father or foster family. The mother's conviction marked the final point in the case. The twins escaped death through desperate resistance and provided key testimony. The court found the woman guilty and placed her in isolation. A new chapter in their lives began for the children, far from their home, which had become a crime scene.